this weekend, I had the opportunity. I don't know if you can see my shirt with the Bigfoot on it. Can you see that? I went to the Bigfoot Rendezvous in Pocatello. It was a lot of fun. I I'm not going to say anything specific about any of the attendees, but I told my wife later that I was wrong about myself not having any social skills. I think I'm better off than some people. That's pretty sad. No, it was really interesting. There were a couple things that were astonishing to me, but my youngest daughter, who just turned 18, she is having me draw or design a tattoo for her of that walking Bigfoot film, and I was able to talk to a guy. His name is Jeff Meldrum. If you ever watch any sort of Bigfoot documentary on Discovery Channel or anything, he's always the scientist they bring in. But he had a cast of that Bigfoot's left foot, her left footprint, and so I got a copy of that for my daughter. I think she'll really get a kick out of it. But have either of you had time to look at the module or read any of it? Okay. This module is a fairly simple one because there's a lot of brain stuff going on. It's we're talking about proportion and sacred geometry. And the project is basically you're going to go through, you're going to draw a golden section spiral with a compass and a straight edge. You're going to draw two sacred geometry stars between 5 and 9 points. You could do 5 and 6 points, 6 and 7 points, 7 and 8 points, 8 and 9 points, or pick whichever two you want to do. And then the fourth drawing is going to be of a sacred geometry egg. And all of these are done with a regular compass and a straight edge. And you can't use a protractor because that's really not going to help at all. And these are, well, I'll get into the reason as to why we're doing it. But this module is basically just to help you to develop an eye for seeing things like golden section rectangle, sacred number, and things like that in artwork that you come across. And also, if you're building something and you want to give it some extra meaning, or you don't understand why it doesn't feel quite balanced to you, these are extra tools in your tool bag that you can use to critique your own work and make it better. Now, I want to ask a question that's really important. Do you think that it is necessary for an artist to use the golden section proportion in their artwork to validate it as art? Casey, you're absolutely right. Megan, you're absolutely right. And if Ryan, if you're shaking your head, you're absolutely right as well. It is not necessary. Those things are used specifically to direct a viewer's eye. Like advertisers, Renaissance painters used it, and classically trained painters use things like the golden section proportions to move your eye throughout a painting and to help you guide you through any sort of dialogue or message that's being presented, so they can communicate more information than they would just with the things that you see. Advertisers love using golden section because your eyes automatically fall on those orthogons we talked about last week, those which are forms that are used to kind of partition elements or place elements within an image. Those are called orthogons. But advertisers use these specifically to lead your eyes where they want them to go. So you can, look at a Facebook ad and go automatically to the call to action. That's one of the main reasons they're used. But the reason why I talk about sacred, do you think sacred necessarily has anything to do with religion? Absolutely not. It doesn't have to have Hi, Ryan. It absolutely does not have to have anything to do with religion. Sacred has a root similar to uh, a phrase, an element of words that we see elsewhere that has to do with something like body, like sarcasm. One of the literal translations of sarcasm is to rip or tear flesh, and the SACR or SARC, that's the element that refers to body or flesh. And so sacred has to do with the body of knowledge that a community holds close or considers important. You find that same kind of root in words like sacrament. A sacrament is a set of actions put together in a ritual that's designed to help the participant gain either a higher order of meditative state or to do something that symbolically represents uh, a greater connection to the divine. So it literally could be pretty much anything. When we talk about things like golden section proportions and sacred geometry or sacred number, we are talking about it not from the standpoint of religion, but from the standpoint of these are tools used by other artists to give information that is important to the community within which they're living, to share information. Remember, we talked about symbols last week, to share information like you do with symbols that is greater than just what you see in the piece of art or the work art or the art environment. And one of those proportions is golden section proportion, but there's an angle that I'll talk about and some other things I'll talk about too. Things like numbers are really important, and multiple religions share the importance of multiple numbers. Numbers are used uh, because of different meanings associated with them by many different artists. If you pick pretty much any number between 1 and 20, there are going to be a lot of sacred connotations from different religious traditions to those numbers. So anybody want to pick a number between 1 and 20? What was that?
5.
What's that?
5.
5. 5 is a really good number. 5 is a sacred number to Wicca and pagan. It's also sacred to Christians and Muslims and several other religious communities. 5 is the number of the elements that alchemists or proto-scientists use. Those 5 elements were not actually considered elements like we think of, oxygen, nitrogen, things like that. They were actually the phases of matter. So Earth had to do with the physical or solid state of matter. Water had to do with the fluid state of matter or liquid. Uh, Air had to do with the gaseous state of matter. And fire had to do with the plasma state of matter. Then the fifth element was also known as ether or aether, Aether, and it had to do with the net of reality within what that things need to be within in order to be considered existing. So it's not so much a state of matter as the property of existing. What is that? The 5-pointed symbol that you see in like witchy T-shirts and dark metal band album covers and stuff like that. What's that called? It's the pentagram. All pentagram means is 5-pointed shape, and that's all it means. And it was designed as a sacred element in a lot of different faiths around the world. We look at Christians, that is just one of the more recent ones. Christianity, when somebody would pray in the ancient church, and we're talking the first 3 centuries of Christianity, they would pray not like people do today, but they would pray with their feet about a shoulder's width apart, their hands outstretched like they were holding something really wide, and their head up. And that would make 5 points of the star. 2 base points would be the 2 feet, the 2 side points are the 2 hands, and then the head would be the point at the top. the answer would be the upside down star. And so the upside down star until the 19th century represented inspiration. What's in a lot of Islamic art in around the world, you see 5 as a very strong number in the design because of the 5 pillars of Islam, which are a declaration of faith, paying tithing, going on Hajj, fasting, and prayer. The 5-pointed star for paganism or Wicca has to do also with the 5 elements, just like the alchemists used. And in that case, it represents a connection to the natural world. So, yeah, we could do that with any number. Like 7, for example, is sacred for Christians because it represents a combination of sharing the idea of the Trinity with the 4 corners of the world, which develops into 7. And 7 is also used as a geometric in the geometric construction of the symbol of the cross. And so it's not because these numbers necessarily have intrinsic value by themselves, but because they've been associated with different elements of a person's walk of faith or a community's walk of faith. And then those are used as part of the teaching principles in artwork that is generated for that particular type of faith. But as you can see, it's shared among many different faiths. It goes all around the world. It's not just linked to one group or another. Now, there's a couple other things that I wanted to mention that in the project description, there's 3 different videos at the very beginning that talk about the golden section spiral. Does everybody know? Have any of you seen the image of a nautilus shell, the spiraling shell? Okay, Megan has. That the nautilus shell is pretty important because it ties in with that golden section spiral rather well. Do you guys remember the name Fibonacci from last week? Who was Fibonacci? Or what are the Fibonacci sequence? Is the Fibonacci sequence? Do you guys remember? Fibonacci was an Italian mathematician that saw that the golden section proportion is seen throughout the natural world. All behind Casey, we can see examples of the golden section proportion. What can we see those? What is behind Casey that shows us the golden section? Every one of those pages. That is roughly the 3x5 rectangle. And Fibonacci was able to show the golden section proportion using whole numbers. And he said it described the width of a leaf to its length, for example, how petals form together around center, the spiral of sunflower seeds, all those kinds of things. And so we're exploring that a little bit. But as I said, is using the golden section necessary to validate something as art? Absolutely not. There's no reason for it. The reason we use the golden section is because that is, I believe, one of the things that our body naturally responds to. That's how the proportions of our body are set up. And that is what the helix of our DNA, if you look down the center, it forms a 10-pointed decagon, and it's 2 5s stacked on top of each other. But it all follows the golden section proportion all the way down the helix. And I think that the golden section proportion defines how atoms connect with each other to form molecules. It defines how chemical reactions take place. It defines the wear patterns on stone. It defines how clouds are formed. It defines even the colors that you see when you look up at the sky. All the colors that you see are electrons losing energy and releasing that energy. And the sequences that energy is released at, or the frequencies that energy is released at, uh, occurs in response to the golden section ratios of molecules and electrons to each other, or of atoms and electrons to each other. Kepler was one of the scientists that was able to show that even defines how gravitational sources like planetary bodies relate to each other in our solar system. It deals with proportions of the golden section. Now, there's some other ratios that are also important to think about. And again, I'm not telling you this so that you are going to build all your art paying attention to this. That is completely beside the point. What I'm showing you is another set of tools that you can use to help you in your evaluation of somebody else's work or critical thinking about your own work. And that's why we're talking about this. Have you noticed that in a lot of medieval art, and we're talking 3rd century to about 12th century, you see the saint figures, they tilt their head when they're praying. They tilt it at a specific angle. Have you noticed that? Look at some of those early saint images, but you will see that when somebody is praying, they will all tilt their head, and more often than not, they tilt their head at a specific angle. If you draw a rectangle that is 3 units wide and 7 units tall, and then draw a line from one corner to the opposite corner, that angle will be the angle of the head tilt of those saints who are praying. And that is pretty consistent from about that 3rd century up to the 12th, 13th century. For about 1,000 years. And it's even consistent for a lot of stuff you've done even more recently. But you know what's interesting? For one thing, I think it's interesting that these guys all did their saints praying at the same angle. But you know what else that angle refers to? That is the axial tilt of the poles of the earth. So somehow all those Christian artists over 1,000 years knew what the axial tilt was. Did you know what that angle was? Now you do. But that's another element that you have that you can use in your description or your critical appraisal of a work of art. What are the primary colors in pigment?
Is it yellow, blue, and red?
Yes, that's absolutely right. Does anybody know what the primary colors are in light? Slightly different. Green, red, and blue. What's fascinating to me is that where that crossover is, those 4 colors, we're talking about red, blue, green, and yellow. Those 4 colors are used in iconographic religious art throughout the world and have been used for the last several thousand years. Now, going back to that 5-pointed star that we talked about earlier, Megan said 5, and I rambled on for quite a bit while you guys were sleeping. What's interesting about that is I just mentioned Christians and Muslims. 5-pointed star shows up in petroglyphs that are thousands of years older. And it shows up in Egyptian tomb paintings that are 3,000 to 5,000 years. And what's fascinating to me is that the star in context, if the point is up, it seems to be associated with people pleading or praying. And if the point is down, so it's an inverted star, it seems to be associated with the answer or inspiration. But going back to those colors, so the primary colors in pigment are red, yellow, and blue. And you would think that everybody would know that who is painting, working with paints. What's fascinating to me is that in religious art, and we're talking early Christian art, the 3 principal colors that they would use were actually red, green, and blue. Green refers to the robes of the Earth Mother or the Holy Spirit. Red refers to Jesus or the Christ figure. And blue, if it's a lighter blue, refers to Mary, the mother of Jesus, or if it's a darker blue, it refers to God, the pan creator, or the creator of the universe. What's interesting to me is that those three principal colors are the primary colors for white light, for pure light. Those weren't discovered until over a millennia later, and these guys knew it anyway. And yellow has been associated in religious art. Yellow and gold, it seems to be constantly associated with things like divine knowledge or heavenly wisdom. And that is those four colors show up pretty much across the board in most religions that use pigments, which is pretty much everyone. Isn't it interesting? I do not think that there are necessarily intrinsic factors to those elements that we know an awful lot about. I think it may more likely be that people are responding to what they see and desire to express greater meaning through using those things that they see in their artwork. That's what I think, and it is fascinating to me that the same proportions, the golden section ratio, the 3x7 or triangle, and those colors, and then number as well. I think it's interesting and fascinating to me that they have been used in so much architecture and art that has had really deep meaning for so many cultures just around the world from the time people first started making stuff, it seems. You look at the geometry of Göbekli Tepe. Where's Göbekli Tepe located? Anybody know? It's a temple complex in Turkey, and it is 3 times older than Stonehenge. But both Göbekli Tepe and Stonehenge show the same kind of sacred geometry, same kind of awareness of sacred numbers, same kind of awareness of fundamental geometric structures. I just think that that's really interesting. So for the project for this week, there are 4 parts to it, and it doesn't really sound like it's going to take a long time, but there's a lot of cognitive stuff that's going on. You're going to have to be doing a lot of thinking, and to get these good enough for you to turn in, you are going to have to do them multiple times until you're comfortable and happy with what you've gotten. The first of these 4 things you're going to turn in is the golden section spiral. And if you begin the spiral by making a square, where did I do it? Making can you guys see that? You make a 6-inch square towards one end of a piece of paper, and then you begin your golden section spiral, building up on that square. Then you'll have room to put it all in one piece of printer-sized paper. So that's the first. You'll have to watch those 3 videos and then produce a golden section spiral. The next part of the project is actually 2 things. You're going to watch all those constructions of various shapes in a circle. And the first one is a triangle. The last one is a nonagon. Anybody want to guess what nonagon, how many points are in a nonagon?
8.
Almost. 8 is octagon. 9 is nonagon. I don't know why they gave it that name. I think they should either make it completely different than 9 or just say ninagon, but it's called a nonagon. You're going to go through those, watch each of those videos, and you're going to pick 2 stars, 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9 points, and create the 2 different stars from following those directions. And if you want to get extra credit, you can do another star. There's another video on there that shows how to divide a circle up into any number of regular divisions. And if you pick that and do like a 13 or 17 pointed star or 11 pointed star, you can submit that as well for extra credit. And then the 4th and last element of this week's project is using the video that shows you how to create an egg with a straight edge and a compass, and just following along with that and creating a sacred egg form. Again, these are designed so that you can have these set of tools in your back of your brain for when you unleash your critical thinking skills and for the tools of artistic critique on either your own work or somebody else's. But it does help. Knowing this, understanding this, and having it in your head will help you to appreciate what you see quite a bit better. Now, there was something else that I was going to mention about all those videos, and I completely spaced it just now. If I remember, I'll tell you. If not, don't worry about it. Oh, yes. Okay, now I remember. You need to make these constructions with a compass and a straight edge. You're not going to have to measure anything. I think, and a couple of those videos, it's going to be really helpful if you turn off the sound, because the person narrating is so mind-numbingly boring. It is just disastrous, and it makes me nauseated. So, play something else in the background while you watch those videos. But the first three are pretty good. They have some pretty good narration to it. If you turn this in, just like freehanding a circle, that's not going to really cut it. The circles need to be made with your compass, because that's the only way to make the accurate divisions. Again, you don't have to measure. The straight edge is there to help you draw straight lines, and that's it. And you can do these constructions without having to measure anything. You're not going to use a protractor or anything like that. And I would really prefer, if you did each of those exercises that you want to turn in, do them at least a couple times so you can make something that you're happy with that looks really good. All right. So does anybody have any questions about the stuff that we talked about today? Anybody have any questions about the projects that we've done so far? All right. Excellent. Well, I hope you guys have a wonderful weekend. Of course, whatever you do this next week, it's not going to beat my time at the Bigfoot Rendezvous. I mean, there's no way you can hold a candle to that. It was a thrill a minute. But I do hope that you guys stay safe and nobody gets arrested. All right, we'll see you guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.